The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Matthew. The Pharisees went and plotted to entrap Jesus in what he said. So they sent their disciples to him, along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere, and teach the way of God in accordance with truth, and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why are you putting me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. And then Jesus said to them, "Whose head is on this, and whose title?" They answered, "The emperor's." Then he said to them, "Give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." When they heard this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away. The Gospel of the Lord. On my sabbatical this summer, I went on a pilgrimage to the trees. We don't have in New Hampshire too many well-worn Christian pilgrimage trails like they do in Europe maybe or North Africa. And the trails to the sacred that were here and traveled by the native people have been mostly lost to us, or maybe lost for now. Maybe we will rediscover more. But as I thought about pilgrimage and my desire for pilgrimage here, I thought about how in Dunbarton, New Hampshire, it's just over there, there's a place that I've gone to all my life. Across a pond, up behind an old, dusty family cabin, up a scruffy trail through the woods, to this wet depression on top of a hill. And in that spot, that particular spot, which maybe is too difficult for logging, there is a family of black gum trees. It's the oldest lived tree in New Hampshire. And some of the trees in this little family there are probably over 500 years old. And I thought that I may have to go outside my species, but there are still some residents of New Hampshire who hold a place, who have preserved a destination that we could journey to for a remembrance of the ongoing presence of the Creator in this land. There are actually in New Hampshire a handful of not just old trees, which are amazing, but intact old forests, a whole community preserving something that can only be said over generations. So one of these places in Randolph, New Hampshire, if you ever have heard of that, there is a brook called Snyder Brook, and my friend Corey and I were hiking gently uphill alongside this brook, and we had to wind ourselves in and out alongside Snyder Brook of hemlock trees that you could hide a bear behind. That's not foreshadowing, thank goodness. but that's how big they were. And we're winding in and out of those until at one point we turned and we had to diverge away from the trail so that we could approach slowly, reverently, this yellow birch that was of such a size, of such a stature, and such character that it drew you. And it also, for me, I couldn't look at it and say, oh, there is a white birch. I could not just identify it by its species. I had to say, there is that tree. It demanded to be known as itself. And we just stood in awe before this tree for some time. And before we left it, I gave it the kiss of peace. It was a tree that made me jealous for those languages, like the native Potawatomi language in America, that can refer to a tree with pronouns without the need to gender it even, but can say, that tree, her, him. And actually, especially my son Julian and I have started referring to trees that way, that we see. And he'll say, who is she, Dad? And sometimes it takes me a minute to say, like, who is he talking about? And then I realize, and I'm so thankful that he's reminded me to see her and to see him. Farther along the brook, there was something that actually slowed me down even more when we came to this thin, young, spreading tree that had gone out to the sunbeams over the brook. Because I don't know if you know this, a hemlock is obligated to grow vertically. It doesn't have any choices, as opposed to deciduous trees. And so this little tree had sprung outward. And I'd never seen this tree in person before, even the species of tree, but I recognized it as a mountain maple. These huge leaves, beautiful little seed pods, seed apparatus. But the reason I remember it isn't because of what it was, what species. It was where it was rooted. Its roots were on and around and into the trunk of a hemlock tree that had fallen. And as I looked at this scene, I realized that what was required for what I was looking at was 400 plus years of the growth of a trunk of a hemlock tree of this size. And then the natural, uncorrected, unimpeded death of this tree. And then maybe 100 years of the natural decomposition of this trunk by the fungal neighbors in this forest, so that this seedling could spring up right here. And offer up something that takes 500 years to say. That's what it means to be a forest with an ancient continuity. We're in stewardship season here at St. Andrews, and you know that two biblical teachings that we really emphasize in stewardship here are gratitude for all that we've been given by God, and proportional giving back some thoughtful, reflected percentage of what we've received, and sending that back toward God, and some of that through the church. And the great thing about going to Scripture as our foundation for giving is that when you use a scriptural teaching as your foundation, there will always be more there when you go back. There'll always be more riches and more to find when you return to that teaching. And that those teachings can actually enrich your spiritual journey. So this year, the new discovery I had of gratitude had to do with going out to the forest. That even in our state, which has been thrice logged and grazed over, and where the rocks have been picked into stone walls that could go around the earth multiple times, here still there are pieces of the land and forest that can bear witness. Oh, this very rich ancient witness to what God has gifted us in the earth. Proportional giving. I'm actually going to stay with the trees here. The last, yeah, right? Wait for it. The last thing I did for sabbatical was that I actually went to the Eastern Old Growth Forest Conference, and which is full of people that are just as strange and wonderful as you would imagine. And it's people who just go out to the forest to find big trees. It's people who cut trees for a living and want to do it in a way that is in a good relationship with the earth. It's people who have a PhD and are a conservation biologist for the Nature Conservancy. All these amazing people. And actually, that conservation biologist for the Nature Conservancy, his name was Mark Anderson. And he gave this presentation full, I think in one presentation in 30 minutes, he referenced about 50 different scientific studies. So I loved the science there. And in one of them, he talked about the sequestration of carbon by trees. So when a tree photosynthesizes, it's actually pulling carbon out of the air to make itself and its trunk and its roots. But he opened up this thing that I'd not noticed, because we tend to tell the story of trees take carbon and they make their bodies, and so it pulls carbon out of the atmosphere. That's the story. But scientists did this thing where they took a crane and put it up over trees and then like misted them with a gas which was containing carbon-13, a radioisotope carbon-13, right? So carbon has in its nucleus 6 protons and 6 neutrons. So carbon is usually atomic weight 12, but if you have an extra neutron, then it's carbon-13. So they can do this and they can track, because you have to know that to get what I'm saying. So they right? So they missed, but they can, because they can make carbon-13 and do that, then they can track where the carbon-13 goes. They can track how the tree is using this specific carbon that they just put on it. And they can follow it and see how the tree uses it. And they found, and that study, alongside a study where they actually took a whole forest and they measured the carbon over a generation, a forest generation, and how much of the carbon is in the trunks, and how much in the roots, and how much is in the soil, and how much is in the woody matter that has fallen on the ground. And they looked at it over time, and they said, actually, when a tree is very young, it's actually putting more carbon into the air than it's pulling down. Because alongside photosynthesis, where they just pull carbon down, they're actually also respiring, just like you and I. They're breathing in oxygen and out carbon dioxide. Trees are doing both. When they're young, they're breathing more than they're pulling down. And then yes, do plant a tree, but it's going to take a few years, because then in their teens, when they're like 20 or 30 years old, they start to break even. And if carbon is like the checkbook of the trees, like they're starting to have a balanced budget. And then as they get older than that, then the carbon starts to put on faster than they're breathing it out, and they become carbon negative. When they become mature trees, large mature trees, they can put on as much wood in a single year as the entire mass of a medium-sized tree, because they're so large. They just whoop, and it's a huge amount of wood. But they also found, when they put the carbon-13 into them and they followed where it went, they said they're taking in this much carbon, but they're only growing by this much carbon. Where's the rest of it going? Do you follow the question? Where's the rest of it going? Which goes down to the roots of the tree, which are connected to fungus underground. And so if they have this much roots, the fungus are connected and grow out farther. They have 10 times as much root space because of the fungus. And that fungus even connects to other trees Some of you know this, right? And they share. And they know that they're doing this from the time they're a young tree. They know that they share. So when the fir tree is getting more photosynthate in the winter, it's passing carbon over to the birches. And then the birches in the summer, when they're like, they're passing that carbon over to the pine trees. And this is all going on. The mature tree may be passing on up to 40% of the carbon that it pulls out of the air. I will never give you a direct number that you need to be giving. But when we look at trees, when we looked at trees 50 years ago, we thought of them in our own image. And probably the worst version of our own image. We just said, oh, they're all competing against each other. And if what you want to do is grow fir trees and cut down fir trees for wood, then you should just cut down everything else around them so that they don't have any competition and they can just grow and they'll get as big as possible. And then we started to realize, and there were studies and they said, oh my God, the firs grow better with the birches. They're sharing. And we started to see trees maybe in a better version of our own image, and to see the community that they were. And now I think we might be at the cusp of a moment where we start to be able to see that trees are a tree, the forest, they are themselves. And it may be worth seeing them in their own image. And they may be doing something. They may be up to a way of life that is more than what we have tended to imagine for ourselves. They could be our teachers. So I'm going to return to the gospel. It's a good place to end. Don't miss the gospel. The trees are really good, but don't miss the gospel. The Pharisees are asking Jesus, should we pay taxes to the emperor or not? And they really like the question they've presented because they want Jesus to either say, yes, you should pay taxes. And they will say, see, he's a lackey of the empire. Or he will say, no, don't pay taxes. And they will say, look, empire, he doesn't want us to pay taxes. You should come down on him. And what's Jesus's response? Pay the emperor what is the emperor's, and give to God what is God's. He takes this question, which the question that is offered him has already seeded the ground of imagination. The entire question is inside the world of the empire and of money. They ask Jesus to define his place in relation, whether he wants to go towards the emperor or away from the emperor. It would be in relation to the emperor. And Jesus says, and he brings the frame of reference outward. And I've seen you do this. You've been doing this in your stewardship reflections that have been offered, where Anna, you said, I'll share my stuff. I'll let St. Andrews borrow my stuff. You took this question of gratitude and of giving and expanded the frame from like, well, I'll write a check for this much. Like you expanded it out. And that's the same thing that the trees are doing to my brain. Or they're expanding out this, what could be possible? What could take place through the sharing of all that we've been given? We could just go away from this interaction with the trees saying, isn't that mystical and beautiful? And it is. But if you can touch it, though. You can go and touch that tree. It's really doing that thing. And you can look at the tree next to it, and they're really actually connected underground. It's tangibly happening. It's actually the way God's world works. It's not just an idea of how God's world works. It's actually how the world works. Jesus is saying, give to God what is God's, which takes your imagination and says, you're going to need to expand what you think is possible through the giving that you do in the world, through the way that you experience your gratitude from God. So pay taxes to the emperor or not, I think much more is possible.